Welcome back to another edition of the This Week in Fantasy series. I'm your host, VenomousStare, and I have two guests with me this week, two very potent division leaders. AB here at 6-6, the King of Funny here at 7-5. Ben, you have the best record, so what do you think going into these last 2 weeks?
Well, for me and Austin, we have to win this week we don't have to, but we can clinch our divisions by winning this week. So, and same for Christian and you, big game there, where he can clinch the division. So, all three divisions could be clinched in the matter of 1 or 2 days, or I guess 3 if you consider the Tuesday game. But really, really pivotal week for a lot of seasons going into it.
Well, AB, what do you think about this considering your last couple weeks? You're at 6-6, you control your own destiny. You got Spencer coming up. What are your thoughts on these last couple weeks?
I think Spence is going to get his revenge on all of my shit talking, and he's really going to knock me out of my playoff contention. To be honest, I think the commission's going to run it. It's just going to be ironic for me and my shit talking to Spencer.
That's an interesting point because another time we would think about Spencer as being a top tier, top of the flight, potentially the best owner in the league. And I think a lot of people were expecting him to come back and really have a great year this year, and he actually had another losing season. So it's interesting that you were able to take a humble look at that and not just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to win, of course. But we can move on and do previewing the last week's matchup, sort of touching base. So, Ben, you had a little bit of a rivalry game here with Cam, and you sort of drove the nail into the coffin, as it were, putting him on a 5-loss streak, completing the Cam lapse. And Cameron and you have sort of had a rivalry for years. So what were your thoughts on this game in general?
Really close. Well, I mean, until Tuesday or whenever the game was, Wednesday. But it was a close matchup for a lot of it, and I'm just glad that a rivalry as long as me and Cameron's ended in another victory for me. That makes it 2-0 against Cameron. Or actually, no, I think that's 1-1. But still, it's a big game. Pushes him even further down. It's pretty much over for Cameron. And I hope he can beat Aaron for me. 'Cause, I still, even if Aaron is in the same position record-wise, or I still think there's a chance Aaron could creep up and win these last 2 games and make it interesting. So I'd like to see Cameron put a good effort in this week, but another victory for me.
Were you surprised to see Cameron collapse after having such a big division lead and really being in a position where between records and real-life circumstances, all the sort of edges were on his side, and he still managed to lose, not just lose the division, but lose 5 in a row and just completely go down in flames? Were you surprised by this? Did you think this was going to be Cameron's year?
I had more optimism than some years. I thought his management had actually been pretty decent, but once again, the waiver wire and the lack of for him and the acquisitions by scouting out who's hot and who's not has kind of hurt him, because these past 5 weeks he's not put out, I think, any of his projected outputs. So, and if he has, it obviously hasn't been enough to win the entire matchup. So I just think that the lack of overall development of his team is kind of hurting him.
AB is the newest owner in the league. You have sort of heard, because you've been friends with us even though you haven't been in the league, you heard some sort of fantasy talk back and forth, so you had sort of a vague idea of who was good in the league and whatnot. What were your expectations of Cameron coming in, and what have you actually thought about him now that you've seen almost a full season from him?
Expectations coming in weren't very high, but 4 or 5 weeks ago, you would think, wow, if Cameron actually just pays attention this year, like, he has the best chance of winning. He was completely running over a lot of it. His the people he was playing, he was running them over left and right. And a fun thing, if you have an iPhone, You know, a lot of times if you don't open an app for a while, it kind of just uninstalls itself to make room for other things on your phone. And I think by this point, Cameron doesn't even have the fantasy app on his phone. It's completely disappeared from what it looks like. But
Well, good thing he's a Droid user. We might have lost him completely. But we can move on from that game and continue to review the matchups from last week. And this was another brutal week for me. If we want to transfer into my division talk, I lose again. And this, if we just look at how the game sort of played out, Raplesberger underperformed, Kareem Hunt underperformed despite an easy matchup, and Ronald Jones and Keenan Allen were really the only guys that held their weight. Logan Thomas, I mean, he was playing the goddamn Cowboys. He should have had 18. But the Texans' defense was a good pickup for me. Detroit looked absolutely terrible on Thanksgiving, as they always do. But Zeke Elliott really took a shit in my mouth. This was the defining factor. The Cowboys, remember, they had played Minnesota the week before and looked pretty good, and they just were absolutely disgraceful on Thanksgiving, a national embarrassment. Other things worth noting, Allen Robinson managed to catch 2, and Derrick Henry had another God mode go-off game. And because of this cutesy cue start of Hinton, it was still sort of a game, in a way, because remember, these Robinson points occurred during the night game. So, brutal loss for me, and this is what we've seen from Weston all year. The Herbert rookie quarterback is a guy who's pretty explosive. Derrick Henry, top flight running back, and that's really the bread and butter of Weston's team, especially when you consider Julio Jones' injury history this year. I want to sort of think about the draft next year. Frequently, we sort of view players at the end of the fantasy season of, they're going to be really sought after next year. Lamar Jackson comes to mind. He had his MVP season last year, carried Aaron to the best regular season he's ever had, and he was drafted early in the first round in this season. So what I'm really asking is, at what pick do you think Derrick Henry will be taken next season, assuming he doesn't have an injury at the end of this year? Ben, and then I'm going to give it to AB.
I still think he'll be a first rounder.
Where in the first?
Where in the first? I think he'll fall a little bit, maybe mid round, end of the first round, but I don't think he'll be as highly sought after 2 straight years of such high volume and such high production. It just seems almost impossible that a running back could have such like a third season in a row. So I don't think it'll be a drop off, but I still think he'll be a late first rounder if at worst, honestly.
What do you think, AB? Do you think he's going to go really high because of this great year he's had?
depending on the actual IRL season, you want to pay attention to the first 3 or 4 rounds of the Titans IRL draft to see if they pick up any other pieces, like some wide receivers or a backup to keep him kind of safe and save him for the later season. If you don't see any of that, then for fantasy, I think he'll be a top 3 pick, hands down. Everyone chases the points, and most halfbacks this year have been real letdowns. Ezekiel Elliott being like a top 3 guy who's just piss poor performance all year, I think he's going to fall to the bottom. But if I'm in that position next year, like let's say I have number 1, like I'd really debate McCaffrey and Henry, just because if they don't pick up pieces IRL, like Henry's going to get the workload and they're just going to keep jamming it.
Well, I completely agree with you, because if we look at the top tier running backs that were going into this season, Zeke, terrible season. McCaffrey, injury-plagued season, when in the past really one of his best points was his inability to ever really get hurt despite how many looks he got. Saquon Barkley, severe injury. So to me, Derrick Henry is slated to be the first overall pick next year. But we can move on from this game and transition right into Seagouch. And if we remember the context of my game, it looked as though I was very live up until the end. And Seagouch, it looked as though he was dead in the water, because Russell Wilson was the last person to play in this game. Lilly had to make up a mere 16 points. Wilson's a top-tier quarterback who really airs it out. They were playing dog shit Philly, who's like a run-stopping team, and he put up a pathetic total of 14, and Seagouch got lucky again. And this was just an absolutely brutal thing to happen to me after a brutal loss. I mean, when you take a brutal loss and the guy right behind you wins like this, it's just crushing. So Koo, this really jumps out. 21 points from a kicker is disgusting. Drake, even though they really are a pass-first team in Arizona, the running backs, both of them, even Edmonds, is very solid. Ben, you can sort of speak on that. What have you thought of Edmonds this year?
Edmonds is, I mean, even when he's not gotten the most carries, which is most of the time because Drake is the lead back, Edmonds still gets a good amount of receiving, like you said, because of the heavy pass that Kingsbury, puts in place. And even if he only gets 5 or 6 carries, he's still getting, averaging like 8-9 yards on those carries, it seems like, and on those receptions, he's averaging a good amount, and he's always a target in the red zone. So, he's almost like a tight end, almost how much they target him as a pass option in the red zone. It's kind of funny.
Oh, definitely. And AB, I just wanted to get your thoughts on Kingsbury's offense, because this is a Texas Tech guy, someone you were very high on. How do you think he's sort of developing as a coach, and where do you see the Cardinals in the next few years?
If you want to take the screen and show them my game, you can see how poor Murray performed in this last game. Murray put up 8 points, so the game didn't go off as well as I planned, and it wasn't firing at its high level that Cliff really aims to achieve each week. One guy who's lost them 2 games this year, just speaking for the Cardinals overall, is their terrible kicker. He's absolutely horrible and has lost them 2 games. Cliff is a great coach. I think one of the best offensive minds in the NFL. But if you can't get your kicking right, he could never even get a kicker at Tech, the poor guy. But I think he should be at an 8-win season right now if they could just have a guy who could kick a field goal. And that really shows from a 2-win season to Cliff's first season. He got 4, I believe, 4 or 6, and he's at 6 now. But I think big things for the future. Let's take a kicker in the first round, someone who can kick at 70 yards. But big things for Cliff to come.
Good answer. Yeah, their kicker is certainly no Dan Rackers, the old Cardinals favorite. So I think now that we have sort of concluded the talk about Seagouch's game, this is a guy who really, if it wasn't for you trading him, Edwards-Helaire would be up shit creek. Because even though he went very running back heavy, Josh Jacobs is banged up going into playoff time. And even though Murray looks really good, I don't know how much I'm really trusting the Saints. They do look good, the Saints do look sharp, but to me, I feel like a Saints team with Drew Brees is very, very predictable. You really know what you're going to get. So the Taysom Hill, even though he does look pretty good, is not as consistent, and he really sucks the other assets down. We see that Murray did have a good week, but in general, Taysom Hill really hurts Michael Thomas especially.
Yeah, 78 pass yards ain't doing it for all the other weapons that the Saints have.
Because remember, Michael Thomas and Drew Brees were one of the best 1-2 punches in the NFL, so to take that away is just brutal for that offense, even though I think that Sean Payton really gets off on having a guy like Taysom Hill in his offense because it allows him to be so creative. But I don't really think the Saints are as powerful in the playoffs without Drew Brees. What are your thoughts on this, Austin? Are you a Taysom Hill or a Drew Brees guys if you had to win in the playoffs this year?
This is Taysom Hill. He's had 2 games, correct?
Yeah, just the 2 since Brees.
I think his second game he performed really bad. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, but those were both in the red zone. The rest of the game was a joke completely. His performance this week, the New Orleans fan base was just hating on him. I don't think he plays very good. And if it was just playoffs, I'd want Breeze. But if you've been cucked like their coach with this boring Breeze player, he can throw a good ball and he can hand it off for Reed really good. But it's kind of fun just to get you a Kyler Murray or just a Taysom Hill, someone who can run it and mix it up. But playoffs-wise, I want to have Breeze. But I think in regular season, I'm mixing up a lot with this guy, but I want to stick to what I know for the playoffs.
I agree, and I think that Sean Payton is going to be in for a rude awakening when he plays one of these really powerful NFC teams. Huge win for Gouch. I mean, this was, and really big loss for Lily too, because if Lily wins this, she's right there with me. She's in the wild card spot, right there with me and Christian. And this was just a brutal, brutal game. So, clap for an AB. We sort of touched on this one earlier, and you did manage to win despite Murray not doing well. Of course, the 45 that Hill drops just jumped right off the page at you. Robinson has another good week. What are your thoughts on this game and its importance as far as the division?
It means everything for the win, for me to hold my number one spot. But like I said, for next week, I think I'm going down, or for this week, I'm going down to Spence. My players really did poorly as usual. Somehow I managed to have someone, usually Kyler pops off for 30 plus, but Tyreek really saved my ass here. I think the Antonio Brown pickup, I can't even remember who I dropped, but man, he's not doing shit for me. Juju's really unreliable. Mixon's hurt as always. All I really have to ride on is Kyler, James Robinson, and Tyreek, and if they don't go off, I'm dead in the water. So I don't feel safe to get to the playoffs, and even if I do, I really don't feel safe to go to the Super Bowl. But for the game-wise, like I said, Tyreek did it all for me. I think by this point in the season, I realize my team is really dull.
Well, it's interesting because you have Ryan Null, and that was, in terms of a dull team, that's sort of like the official stamp of approval is the Ryan Null pickup. But big win for you, and don't get too down on yourself because in the first round you get to play the winner of Ben's division, no matter what. So that could be like a winnable matchup, and then best of one in the Super Bowl. So don't get down on yourself. You're still in the division lead, still dangerous. And with Tyreek Hill, he's sort of like Derrick Henry in a way where he can just do so well that it just destroys the whole game. Speaking of destroying the whole game, Jackson just monster moded Spencer and started Fitzpatrick, which was an intelligent start. Weirdly, Fitzpatrick is back starting from Miami, which is like when you separate with your wife and you go back in the house when you're being kicked out. Like, Fitzpatrick wanted the hell out of Miami. Tua had a bad game and now they want to shelter him. It's just a bad situation. But it was a good high risk little pick from Jackson, and Gibson was really the standout of this game, running all over the worst Cowboys rush defense ever and in the league currently. That's just free points if you get to play against the Cowboys. Really, really good to be able to start your guys against the Cowboys, who are just a fucking embarrassment. Also, good start by Jackson to really say, I don't think the Cowboys win against Minnesota was legit, even though they did, put up 31. Minnesota's regarded as a pretty decent team. So, as far as the implications of this game, to me, what jumps out is Spencer's at 9 losses, whereas, 6 and 8 is sort of like you're right there at 500. Spencer could finish the season with double-digit losses. That would be very, very unexpected. Jackson, one thing I love about him, even though he's had the worst year by far out of anyone in this league, and, he's had some bad luck, he's stuck in it harder than everyone on the waiver wire, and he's shown a lot of, discipline and a lot of just follow through to stay with the league. A lot of people, they fall behind and they give up. So, love to see that. And we already covered this. We can touch on this a little bit, but you beat Cam and you just buried him, and that's really all that needs to be said about this game, I feel like. And then finally, Aaron got smashed. He's at 5-7. The most significant thing about this game is Aaron's down at 5-7 with Cam, and Mark is at 6-6. But if we just sort of look at Aaron's team, he's starting Cam Newton. Dalvin Cook has, even though he's ranked 2 and has these insane pop-off games, Minnesota does not look good right now, and I don't feel like you're in a position, if you have Minnesota players, to really feel happy about where they are as a team. Calvin Ridley, who, obviously every time we talk on the show about Calvin Ridley, your name comes up, Benny Boy, but Aaron traded for him, and as I predicted, this was a great sell-high trade. He's been, solid. The Falcons do air it out. Julio's freaking hurt all the time. But this isn't, considering how much Julio's been hurt, how much the Falcons play from behind, these aren't the sort of numbers that you would expect with how much Aaron gave up. So even though I like to see trades in general because it promotes action, this was definitely one that Aaron lost. Although this is not who I thought it was. This is who I was thinking of. This Claypool pickup has been excellent. Really, Juju Smith-Schuster, for every time and ball that he misses, AB, this is the guy that swoops in and gets it. What would have been your thoughts on the rise of Claypool?
It's great for their team. It's horrible for mine. It's really made me not ever want to pick up Juju again. And in this league, there's two players already most people hate, Joe Mixon. And who's the other?
Odell Beckham.
Odell Beckham, who I also had and have dropped. Juju is added to that list for me. I'll never take him again. Chase Claypool's ruined all the love I had. That's about it, what I think. Something really interesting, if you exit that and you go to Jackson's team, scroll down to Metcalf.
Sorry.
Fried rice, sorry.
No problem. Yeah,
Metcalf was probably like an unknown second or third rounder, maybe fourth this year. I have no idea when he was picked up. This man has absolutely went off and shown he's a proven back in the league. Somewhere among the level of Hopkins or whatever the guy you were just, Julio. Even he's not as fast as Tyreek, but this man is an absolute monster.
He is a burner. He's similar stylistically.
Yeah, unreal speed, and God, he gets the looks too. I think he's going to be a first rounder in the next draft.
Really?
He's insane. Yeah, he's sick. Maybe not first. Probably second,
like
he's got somewhere
Tyler
around.
Lockett to compete with. Still.
I think in the first you're going to see a Tyreek and a Hopkins go off the board, but this is going to be an early second. Metcalf has just killed it this season.
Yeah, one thing to consider about Metcalf is he has an incredibly consistent quarterback. Whenever you look at a receiving option, you sort of think about how the offense works in general, how many other options there are, but Russell Wilson is just in general going to play well and not fuck stuff up, and he has a high completion percentage. So Metcalf's been incredible this year, but interestingly, Lockett has still been decent.
Also, Wilson's 40 or 50 yard bombs where he just lands it in your hands no matter even if you're fucking looking at the ball. You're just running and somehow Wilson has made this ball land in your hands.
Yeah.
So he's got a great quarterback. Big things for this guy's future, and I hope to snag him in the next draft.
Love that. So we can move on to everyone's favorite part of the show, the previews.
I do love, though, in that last matchup that no Fried in the career of the league is 13-7 in the matchup with Aaron. So
Very interesting stat.
it does say a lot how no Fried, even if he's not someone that we've known personally, he's really taken a hold of this division at points and can really dominate these division matchups.
Well, he beat me in a Super Bowl, and he just buried Rampy. So I think that's a solid point. We can move on. I think we should get the boring matchups out of the way first. Here we have a matchup really for pride. Theoretically, these teams could go back-to-back 7-7 and win the division, but it would be somewhat difficult because, of course, they're mirrors. But Gardner Minshew sort of went to shit, and it was usually if the gimmick of your team goes to shit, then your team in general goes to shit, and that's what we see with Aaron Ramhard here. Dalvin Cook has really, I think, shaken that label of an injury-prone, high-risk guy. I sort of think of him in the same way that I think of Shady McCoy about a decade ago, when he was in Philly, mind you, with Chip Kelly and Riley Cooper. This is a guy who is just incredible when he's on, and then he had a couple of knee injuries and everyone was real scared of him, and then he sort of came back and had a lot of healthy seasons. So Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry are two guys that I feel like people were sort of a little bit shy about taking this year. Think about in the draft how people viewed these two guys, Cook and Henry, versus Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon was seen as the safe play. Joe Mixon, 170 points easily. That's how every year that's how Joe Mixon is written about. And there are a lot of fantasy players who sort of always have like a really inflated, laughable projection. OBJ is like this. And to me, whenever I look at Cook and Henry and the way that they work in their offense, they're a real terror. These are the sort of guys you want on your fantasy team. What do you think about this point, Ben?
Yeah, I mean those are some of the bellback the bellback of the league. I mean some of the best players, not just skill players, just all around. I mean Dalvin Cook is one of those players that through injuries he's come back, he's performed, and especially on an offense that really relies on him heavily, just the same as Derrick Henry and the Titans. Like Kirk Cousins can only go as far as Dalvin Cook's running game is going to get him that game, and especially with the play action. So he's the whole cog of that offense, and a player like that is just invaluable, especially in today's age of fantasy.
He's the whole cog, like the M40 on Countdown. One thing that jumps out at me about these guys, though, is there are really only about a handful of fantasy players that can true like 1v9 hard carry you solo through a week. Cook, Henry, Hill, and maybe Julio. There's just a handful of these guys, and we've seen both Cook and Henry solo carry Aaron and Weston in certain weeks. So that's one thing that I look for against an abominably bad Jacksonville defense. So much for Saxonville. This team is just deteriorating. Every week they get worse and worse. They're a total disgrace. And I think that Ridley is going to have a good week versus New Orleans. I don't really feel like New Orleans is going to be able to shut them down. That'll be a throw it around fest. Claypool set to have a big week versus Washington. So overall, I'm going to edge Aaron here. If you guys have anything to add, AB, you want to throw something in here?
I'm really unentertained by the matchup. I've given up on Cameron for whatsoever, and I think Aaron wins. But I'm not even looking at the projections or anything, but just give it to Aaron and walk away.
Yeah, I think it goes to Aaron too. I think that Dalvin Cook, Calvin Ridley, and Cam can have a wild card of a week and get 20 points. So, especially with Claypool as well, I think there's just a lot of positives on this team for Aaron that overshadow Cameron.
We'll lay a solitary rose down for the memory of Cameron, and then we'll all just walk away. Advantage Aaron.
F for Cameron.
An F in the chat for another Cameron season. Yeah, we're not going to be posting any ends in the chat. Alright, here we can do a good matchup. This is Ben versus No Fried. This is an interesting matchup, obviously, because if we look at the records, you're just one game above him, and he's your division rival. Do you remember who won in the first few weeks? You did? Okay. Yep, you won. It was a nice game. So this one isn't as important as if you had lost, but if you win here, you bury him in clinch. And the wild card is not really an option for either of you guys, which is scary. That's coming out of the Cursed Lands division, whether it be me or Lily or maybe even Weston, but probably me. And in this game, Ben, if we just look at the matchup overall, Josh Allen is going to have to continue his good form. He's playing broken down San Francisco, and Nick Chubb is really stealing a lot of touches from Hunt since he came back. So I kind of want to get your thoughts on this. You're starting Deebo Samuel, who you picked up. What are you thinking about in this matchup?
Trying to just fill some spots that I'm not so confident about, with Mike Evans being out with a bye week, which is strange and this far into the season. But having Frank Gore starting at running back along with Chubb, then having David Johnson starting his first week back off the IR, there's just a lot of question marks for me. And I mean, it's the best I think I really have to offer at this point, but it's just compared to No Fried's team where he has some surefire players that get playing time. Except for, and Eckler's back, I think, yeah.
Yeah, he had played last week.
So yeah, he has some players that don't look amazing, like when you just see the names, but when you look at their stats, they've performed pretty consistently, if not above average. So I'm kind of scared about this week. Like I said, there's question marks at running back for me, and with having Deebo Samuel in there, it makes me a little bit nervous.
What about this Lindsey and Ballage on the bench? They're still questionable. Obviously, I try to wait as long as possible to do these episodes. It's Saturday afternoon. They still got a big droopy Q by them. you would love to get Lindsey in there probably if you could. Would you start Lindsey over Gore if he was healthy?
Probably not. Over, I mean, especially, I mean, he is playing KC, which is, appetizing, but his performance recently, he just hasn't had a lot of touches, and he's been injury prone a lot in the games. And compared to, and even if it is Frank Gore, I mean, Frank Gore is the starter now. I mean, he's
Oh boy, of the Adam Gase offense.
he only has one touchdown on the year though, but he's putting up consistent yards, and I mean that at this point with Lindsey being as injury prone as he has, and Melvin Gordon stealing most of the touches there, that they do even give to the running backs in Denver. I think Frank Gore is a little safer option just because he can maybe put out 6 or 7 for me.
They basically got rid of Lev Bell and ate the contract, essentially, to have this ancient guy, Frank Gore, starting. I think a lot of the points that you made stand up to me. You have a lot of question marks, and even one of your best, most consistent players, Scary Terry. His listen is questionable. He's full practice, so he'll play, but you don't ever like to see guys like this banged up. AB, what are your thoughts on this matchup? What stands out to you?
Scroll up. I feel safer in a playoff spot going against Mark, so I'm going to root for him and edge him all night long. But
Edge him all night long, baby. You got the cleanest asshole in Texas, AB, over here.
I fear Ben's team more, and for Ben's sake, I hope he can pull it off. But I'm rooting for Mark. I want him to win. But let me look at some players real quick. Sitting here with my dick in my hand while you were talking.
Well, Mahomes pops off right away at you with that playing against Denver.
Yep. He's got Mahomes, Metcalf.
He's got Dobbins
Thielen.
against the worst run defense in the league.
Cooper Kupp against Arizona. That's not good for you, Ben.
This is a tough game for Ben to win. Washington against undefeated Pittsburgh.
Frank Gore's been passed around this league more times than a girl in a sorority house or frat house.
Heyo.
But yeah, I wouldn't believe in Gore. Chubb sharing time in the red zone because what's his name gets all the red zone looks.
Cream Hunt.
This is tough. Yeah, Hunt. I don't know. I think No Fried kind of has it here. If Metcalf, Mahomes pop off, that's kind of good for me. But I don't know. Yeah, I going with Mark on this one. No shade.
I have to go with Mark as well, especially considering Eckler is bona fide healthy. Dobbins is playing the abominably bad Dallas defense. They're going to get ahead of Dallas early and run on them a lot. They might even end up pulling Jackson by the fourth quarter. Thielen and Metcalf are going to have big games against shit defenses. This one's looking really bad for you, Benny boy.
Jackson even in this week?
Lamar?
Yeah, because RG3 played for him last week.
The Ravens could start Chad Henne and beat the Cowboys by 20 points, okay? And Dobbins is going to get his looks. We can touch on Lamar, but yeah, I think Mark has the advantage, and I think it's significant here actually. Chad Henne. You're considering starting Edmonds?
Maybe, because like we said about Drake with Christian, I mean he's been getting the most of the carries, and even if Edmonds has been consistent, I don't know. At this point, I would like for more consistent touches than hoping on averaging 8 yards a carry. So we'll have to see.
Well, we can take a peek-see here at Lamar. Maybe activated, maybe, but not going to have an effect on the game. It's interesting that they got RG3 as their backup and even had him last year because, yeah, you can. Well, he didn't really play until last year, but the point that I'm making is if you just look at that offensive style they like, it would be almost impossible to have a backup that could run that same playbook with all the run plays, and RG3 just fits so perfectly. I think that's why the Ravens are so scary and such a good team is, yeah, they have the explosive running quarterback that's hard to stop, but like the team doesn't go to absolute shit when he inevitably gets hurt. Anyway, we can talk about Clap 4 and Jackson. To me, this is a matchup where Kevin's really just winning to try to stay even with AB, so this one's actually very important to you, AB. And what do you think about this one, Benny? Because for me, thinking about this matchup, Jackson had a phenomenal performance last week. He lost in the opening week to the commish after talking a lot of trash. And interestingly, Jackson really has a chance to shiv the commish rather badly here by sort of icing AB's division lead. To talk about this game a little bit, what do you think?
I mean, really big because obviously, even if Austin loses this week, he has the chance of clinching with a loss here by clap for, and Jackson, like you said, could really stick it toward the commish. And as we said earlier, he's a manager that always is active on the wire, and especially when he's got a record as he does, 4-8, he can be really active on those first few picks.
Yeah, priority.
And he has. So it's a misleading matchup when you see that 4-8 for Jackson, especially with how he performed last week. So it's an interesting matchup for sure because it's all on the line for Kevin. And to be fair, I think the favor is in Jackson's hands.
I agree, and if Kevin wants to win, I really think he should start the Ravens defense against god-awful Dallas. And it's actually really weird to get burned by this many buys this late. I mean, TB12, the cornerstone of his team, McCaffrey and Godwin all on bye. I just really don't see how the commissioner is going to win this game.
I don't want to put any bad juju on it. I have nothing to say.
Maybe not the best for a talk show there, Juju. You've got bad Juju on your team all fucking year. He's on your bench. So we can talk about the next matchup, which I think we should finally talk, the Gouch and I. So this one obviously is just an absolute shit show, and this is going to be like the defining game of the season. And AB, let's hear what you have to say about it first this time.
You know what? Let me get some scrolling. Let's see. So Christian's favored. Who's he got? Clyde. Going against Denver. Yikes. I don't know, buddy. Feeling kind of good for Rodgers on this one. Not much to say, to be honest. I think Christian's going to kind of edge it with his players compared. I think Hunt and Elliott keep shitting the bed.
I think you're right, yeah. Yeah, Hunt and Elliott, I think, I'm in this shitty position where Kareem Hunt does get the red zone looks, and the Cleveland Browns do have the most rushing yards in the league. But since Nick Chubb has come back, he's been a big focus of the offense. With OBJ out, they're not really as explosive. They don't score as many points, even though they are looking good. And like I said, Zeke Elliott has just been really awful, and it was just so soul-crushing to see the Cowboys and Zeke finally do well against Minnesota and then just regress back to the most disgusting form imaginable on the biggest stage imaginable. So that's what jumps out at me about my team. Another thing that has been low-key shit for my team is Hopkins' ridiculous inconsistency. He has these like weeks that just absolutely ass fuck me. But Benny boy, I'd love to get your thoughts on this because I'm finally starting Landry. He got double-digit targets last week. Finally, I've been rostering this motherfucker all season. Knew OBJ would get hurt. But even after he did, they run so much, he still wasn't any good. And because of this droopy bye week, Ronald Jones, I'm going to have to start him. So does the Gouch edge me? Is the Gouch the unstoppable terror this year? Did AB create a monster like when Vegeta wouldn't let them kill Cell?
I think it's the edge is definitely with Christian on this one, but not by as far as I think. Like I do think you do have a fighting chance because I do like the Jarvis play because obviously no OBJ. I can't even think maybe other than Hayden Hurst then gets targets in that offense when they do pass. He's receiving a large volume of targets, and I like that, especially in against a game against Tennessee, which they might be trailing. But still, I don't see you overwhelming Christian, to say the least. If you do win this, I think it's going to be very, very slim. And I think if Christian wins, it could be by at least 15-20. So based on that alone, I do see him having a slight edge. But very close. I think it's closer than my game with no Fry, that's for sure.
10-15, Benny. Slide edge. Come on.
Is it 10 to 15? You got to pick. Is it going to be 10 to 15 or is it going to be close?
No, I think if you win, it'll be close. But I think if he wins, it's going to be a sizable win.
Okay, fair enough.
A comfortable win.
To me, the running backs are going to be the crux of this game, because if Zeke and Kareem both shit the bed, not only am I going to lose this and I'm in danger of losing my playoff spot, but even if I do make the playoffs, it's going to be very hard to cobble together a win, because if we just consider, I had the Kittle injury hurt me, and when I invested a lot in the Bengals with their kicker, who was ranked number 1 when I picked him up, the Aggie Bullock, as well as Tyler Boyd, who was probably like a top 15 fantasy receiver whenever Burrow was healthy. He's ranked 19 now, and when Burrow went down, this was devastating. I also think Antonio Brown joining the Bucs sort of like fucked everything on that team up. It was like, why? The team with the most weapons, the biggest names, the least time to gel, they're like, what are we going to do? Add like the most antagonistic, hard to get along with player available, and that was just so foolish. To me, that was like whenever they got Tom Brady, it was sort of like a we the Patriots now, like look at me, we the Patriots now moment. And them doing that was like such like a, oh well, the Pats did it with Randy Moss, like we have Tom, fuck him, we'll do it. And that was just like, it's kind of hubris to me. It reeked of hubris. But I think I would give Gouch the slight edge here, and my win conditions are I'm gonna start the Vikings. That's a micro mistake, but I think my win conditions here are going to be the running backs flooring at like 9, and I'm gonna need my receivers to get their shit together. But this is rough. Christian's looking very strong, and he's sort of like a disgusting Frankenstein's monster of AB's fantasy newbiness, and Christian spending 10 years, as Jackson puts it, trying to trade fuck everyone. And he finally trade fucked someone. Usually, as Spencer describes it, I woke up to 4 trades from Seagouch and they were all insulting. And that's what Christian does almost exclusively. And unfortunately for Austin, he didn't know that Joe Mixon and OBJ get overhyped every year. Oh, projected 180. This is the year. It's like they never reflect. They never, these fantasy projectors, they never consider injury or anything like that. But probably a slight edge here for the Gouch. Do we have any matchups left to cover? Have we talked? I don't think we've done this one. I think this is the last one.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, okay, so Russell Wilson's going to stomp the Giants. Hebert's been good all year. I can see Derrick Henry having a big game. Overall, God, I'm going to be so... Just give me your quick thoughts on this one, Benny Boy, because this one actually has significant impact on my division because they're both 7-5.
I think even despite Lily's good year and a division that's been at each other's throats, I think that Weston is going to win this one, get himself closer into a playoff spot, whether it be the division or that wild card. So just looking at it though, I mean there's some things that Lillard can do, obviously with getting Galladay out and putting a defense in, but I think Weston and Billy had this one covered, to be honest. I think there's a lot of talent.
And I ain't talking Billy Bean. You want to give a winner prediction here, AB?
I'm going with Weston, even though Lily Bobby Brown is pulling the typical Watson thing. Already still has someone on by. She'll fix it morning of, but Weston's going to take it down, kill the queen. It just is what it is.
Alright, good prediction. I'm going to give Weston a slight edge as well. And just before we wrap up the show, I want to ask you guys one final question. We see here this division, the top 4 teams in the league are all in one division, and 2 of these teams are going to miss the playoffs, folks. Yeah, and yeah, good for you. And Austin just pointed at the monitor and told me to highlight this, his points against. But anyway, guys, do you think that there should be a playoff restructuring of who makes the playoffs?
I am not too familiar with how all of it works, to be honest. So I don't.
One from each division and one wild card. Some people think like two more teams should make the playoffs, or it should go by total record as opposed to division or something.
Yeah, how it is right now, that way is how the college football playoffs work, and people have been complaining about that since they've started the college playoff. Um, yeah, I think that structure needs reworked. I kind of thought that was just like that's how fantasy worked. I didn't know we could restructure it, but
Yeah.
definitely at least two more teams.
Well, it's funny that you bring up college football because I actually think we should go to back to the BCS system where I just get to decide who's in the playoffs arbitrarily. Benny boy, if you could restructure the playoffs, would you, and if so, how?
I mean, are we gonna restructure the NFC East now too?
Well, it's just a question. You can say no, divisions work that way. Weak division winners win sometimes.
That's what I'm saying. That's how division works. I'm a traditionalist. I mean, hey, 7-5. I mean, I want that division spot. If I can go 8-5, or I mean, what is it, 8-6 by the end of this season? I mean, that's worthy of a playoff spot. Always has been. It sucks for y'all's division, but it creates parity in the league, and it's not something that we see very often.
Yeah, I'll say this. Even though I am the guy who is in prime position to get ass fucked by this format, one thing that I absolutely love about this year, especially doing this show, is that we're in the last 2 weeks. Usually half the teams are dead by this point, like have next to no chance. Every team is live except for Spencer, which is insanity. Imagine if you had come to someone right after the draft and been like, when there's 2 weeks left, every team will be live except Spencer. They would have said you were crazy.
Imagine asking Spencer that.
Yeah, be like, Spencer, what are well, I'd love to get odds on that. Everyone live? Like, forget Spencer being out. Just having everyone live with 2 weeks left is like almost a mathematical impossibility. You would have to have divisions like this. It's just insanity.
You'd have to have your numbers right, and you'd have to crunch the numbers, all that. And Spencer does it, but I maybe he got numbers from last year or something. I don't know. We need better numbers, Spence.
What are your thoughts on Spencer's numbers, Ben? You're itching to say something over there.
I think his algorithm is a little messed up because I love referring to that projections chart that he had at the beginning of the year, right after the draft, on our first episode of Twiff.
Yeah.
And man, looking at where he's won and some of the other projections, it's just doesn't make sense how those numbers crunched, and especially how they've played out. So
How could the numbers be wrong?
Well, now Spencer knows what I went through, projecting myself as the best team in the league in the draft review video year after year and getting flamed for it. It's just that I didn't have a full pie graph, and I finished around 500 every year, not with the worst record. So I love having Spencer on, and I love his graphs, and I feel like he's due for a big season next season for sure. But I feel like it makes himself an easy target when he says, I'm number one, and he struggles like this. So him and Jackson both were very loud at the beginning of the year and are struggling this year. But remember, guys, they've maintained their activity, and that's very important. So that concludes this week's Twiff episode. And I'm going to give y'all one final word. Just say the team name. Who's going to win the Super Bowl this year?
Christian.
I'm gonna say Lily.
I'm going to go with the Gouch. And with that, we conclude the episode.